Welcome to section number 2, where we will address some key concepts regarding I.T.I.L. The first topic will be about services and service management. What exactly is a service? In very simple words, a service is a way to help customers achieve outcomes. How exactly do we do that? Well, by executing an activity instead of the customer. We are doing something for the customer to help them achieve an outcome. By doing that, we as a provider, we also deal and assume some of the risks and costs associated with that activity. What exactly does it mean? Let me give you an example. Let's say I am trying to repaint my old apartment. So I could have two different approaches. I could either do it myself, or I can go to a specialized organization, the service provider who can do that for me. In the first option, if I choose to do it myself, I will have to go to the store and buy all the necessary equipments, and paint, and plastic foil, protection gear, and so on. So that would be a specific cost associated with painting the wall. But it would be a waste, because what am I gonna do with it? All this equipment after the job is done. Right? There are also specific risks involved. As the customer, for example, there is a risk I may injure myself in the process. Maybe dropping something on the floor and messing the floor. This is a specific risk associated with that. In option number 2, if I would choose to go to a specialized provider, these risks and these specific costs would be assumed by the provider. So that would be an advantage for me. Also, you need to know for the exam that the value in I.T.I.L is co-created. What does it mean exactly? In the latest years, we come to realize that actually, not only the provider is important when creating value, but also the customer has some responsibility. That is the concept of value co-creation. For example, if I as a customer am not specifying the right colors, then definitely I will not be satisfied with the end results. That's just an example under the concept of value do creation. So it's not only about what the provider does, or how they do it, but it's also about what the customer does to ensure the creation of value. Although we talk about services, and I mention that I.T.I.L is a framework in service management, in reality, these days most of the time providers do not just sell services to their customers. Most of the time they sell what we call in the I.T.I.L a service offering. What exactly is that? It's like a package which contains some goods, access to resources, and service actions. Let's understand this with an example. Suppose if you are a customer of a bank, and the bank wants to provide you access to your accounts by using a credit card. So the bank will give you a debit or a credit card, which you can use. The card itself is a product, something physical that you keep with yourself. But for the card to be useful, bank will also need to give you access to their network of ATM, cash machines, so that you can deposit or withdraw cash. Whenever you have a technical issue, the bank will also provide you with user support. So it will give you access to some service actions. That's the concept of service offer. It's comprised of goods, access to resources, and service action. We take about services. But what about service management? Service management, according to I.T.I.L, is a set of specialized organizational capabilities for enabling value for customers in the form of service. In more simple language, service management is about everything an organization has to do in order to make sure they provide the most valuable services with the minimum efforts to their customers. So it's about getting organized. It's about being efficient, being effective. It's about eliminating waste. It's about improving yourself. It's a discipline with a lot of practices, with a lot of guidelines or principles. I.T.I.L is currently the model for service management. It is the most popular framework for service management. So you should know the official definition. You should also know the fact that the larger the company, the more important is the service management. If you are a startup, you do not have much need for service management. But the larger you grow, more important is going to be, because if you don't have service management, if you do not invest in that, your company is going to be in complete chaos. It is going to be very difficult to manage and predict. In this video, we will discuss the service organizations. Let's begin with the definition. What is a service organization? It is a person or a group of people having specific authorities and responsibilities to share a common objective or a list of objectives. It could be a small organization or a large one. It doesn't really matter. From a role perspective, organization in I.T.I.L can have two different roles. They can either be service providers or service consumers. Sometimes they can be both. I will explain this in a few minutes. First of all, let's have a short discussion about the service providers. You should remember for the exam that the providers can be internal. And when we are talking about the internal provider, the picture looks like this. For example, internal IT in this picture could mean a small IT department in a business organization, providing services to their business customer, to their internal consumer. In turn, the business organization will further provide products or services to the final or external consumer. This is how an internal IT provider looks like. In the second scenario, we also have external IT service providers. In this, the picture looks like this. IT will be a dedicated IT company or an IT organization that is working directly with the final consumers and providing the services to them. Although they are different, you should remember that everything and every concept that we discuss in the further video and in all the sections are applicable, no matter what type of provider we are talking about. So it is applicable to both the internal and external service providers. What about service relationships? As I said before, most organizations are both consumers and providers. Obviously, when you have one organization interacting with another one, it's important to have somebody managing that relationship, because it is a dynamic interaction. It involves activities that have to be performed by both the provider and the consumer in order to enable value co-creation. What exactly did I mean by this? Let's see this with an example. Suppose we have an organization A providing service to an organization B, which obviously has to consume these services, and then further provide service to an organization C. By consuming these services, C is able to provide the services to the final customer. It looks like a chain of organizations. It looks like an ecosystem. Actually, this is how most of the industry works right now. We have interconnected companies or interconnected organizations working together and collaborating in order to create value to their final consumers. Let's take an example of your bank. When you are using the services provided by your bank, you have a relationship with your bank. But, in return, bank has a contract with the internet service provider, because they need to have access to the internet. And that particular internet service provider will further have a supplier for the electricity. So, you see, it's like a chain of the organization, working together, collaborating in order to co-create value. And service relation management is exactly what creates the bond. It binds all of them together and creates this ecosystem, creates this chain of the organization. Everything has to be synchronized in order for the final consumer to receive or to achieve that value that they seek. Let's look at a little bit about the individual responsibilities of each organization. In this example, we see that the main responsibilities of the service provider, what exactly it means to do the service provision. And we have a list of activities. First of all, we need to make sure as the provider that we manage and configure the resources properly to deliver our services. For example, this video training that you are taking right now, it had to be prepared in advance. The platform had to be prepared. Those videos had to be recorded. Everything had to be in place. in order for you to experience this online training. Also, the provider must give access to the users. You need to have access to this platform in order to have access to this video. Also, the provider has to deliver on the agreed service action. If there are any service action to be delivered, for example, if you are supposed to take an exam, or maybe you are supposed to raise any issue, in some cases, then this kind of action must be executed by the provider. And they must execute according to a service level agreement. So they have to execute with some quality parameters. Also, the provider must make sure that they implement continual improvement, so that they continually improve according to the previous experiences. They maintain their services, they maintain their technology, they maintain their processes, and so on. This is covered by continual improvement. The latter consumer also has their responsibilities. They need to make sure they have the right resources in place in order to use the service. For example, the laptop that you are using right now has to be prepared. Otherwise, you won't be able to access the video training. Also, the users must initiate any service actions that they require. For example, if you are facing a technical issue, you should report that to the service provider in order to initiate some action. Right? Report it as an incident. Sometimes when the service offering includes some goods, users are also responsible for receiving the goods and taking care of them, using them properly, in order to be able to use the service. In this video, we will talk about value and cost. Value is regarded as the perceived benefits, usefulness, and importance of something. What does it mean? It can have different meanings. It can take up different forms. Because sometimes values are about money, it's about revenue. So it has a financial aspect. But it can also be measured in customer loyalty. It can also be measured in the number of outcomes that a particular customer has achieved. It can also be measured in the reputation of the organization or brand awareness. So it can have different meanings depending on the context. It is definitely something that consumers want to achieve. You should also remember for the exam that ultimately the consumer or the customer will have the last word about the value. They actually define value. It doesn't really matter how good the service looks on paper. The numbers could be great. But if no customers actually buy the service, then its value should be considered to be zero. The problem is the customers tend to be subjective. They do not always judge by the numbers. So no matter how good the service looks on the paper, they may choose another provider. Because they have their own perceptions. Because they have their own preferences. For example, some people just prefer the color green. If you give them a selection of different products with different packages, they will automatically go to the packages colored in green. That is something very hard to anticipate. Because it is not related to the quality of the service. It is mostly related to the color of the package. So it's also about the marketing. It's not only about the actual numbers. The actual figures. That's the tricky part with value. It's difficult to anticipate, it is difficult to measure. And it's also dynamic and customer specific. What does it mean? Well, each customer may value different things on the particular service. And for one customer, service could be really valuable, while for other customers that service will really have zero value. Also, the perception, the needs, and the preferences of a customer evolve in time. They are not static, they are dynamic. So one day the customer will prefer something, and the next day they might prefer something else. That's also very difficult to anticipate. So it sounds really complicated. But there are some things that can be measured about a value. There are some things that can be defined. These are utility and warranty, the two main components of value. The utility is about the functionality. It's about the purpose of the service. Each service needs to bring some functionality. Should serve a purpose. Help the customer achieve a particular outcome. For example, one of these is how the service should behave. How it should be delivered in order to provide the value. What the things we deal with like availability, capacity, security, continuity. The kind of things that are usually negotiated and agreed in the service level agreement. These are the expectations of the customer regarding the quality of the service. So both utility and warranty are required. You should also remember in the exam that the utility may also be called fit for purpose. Warranty may also be called fit for use. What about cost? Cost is the amount of money spent on a specific activity or resource. Whenever we do something, whenever we invest some effort and resources, there will be a cost associated with that. It can be of two different types. Some costs can be removed from the consumers by using the service. The other cost will be imposed on the consumers by using the service. How does it work? For example, suppose I want to do something myself. I am the consumer, and instead of going to the provider, I choose to do the activity myself. Then I will have some specific costs like in the previous example, in the previous video, when I tried to paint my apartment, I will need to buy all that equipment. That will be a specific cost associated with that service. By going to a dedicated provider to do that activity instead of me, I can actually get rid of that specific cost. So the cost will be removed from me and will be taken by the provider. But at the same time, there would be another cost imposed on me. The price of the service, because the service will not be delivered for free. So this is why we say the cost can both be removed and imposed on the customer by using a particular service. In this video, we will talk about output and outcome. The difference between these two concepts, and why is it important. First of all, the output is considered to be the resulting deliverable of an activity. It can have multiple forms. It can be tangible or intangible. And one activity can have multiple outputs. Outputs are not the reason why customers choose your service. They do not usually ride the can in the middle of the rush hour just because they want to enjoy the service. They have a specific outcome. And most of the time, when we talk about this kind of services, their outcome is about moving an outcome from point A to point B and getting to their destination in one piece. So that is the actual outcome, the intended result for a stakeholder. So you should not confuse the outcome with the output. Although a particular service may come up with a multitude of outputs, they are simply means to achieve an outcome. So the outcome is the actual end purpose, using that service. That's the actual reason why the customer is paying for that particular service. So the outputs can be of a large quantity, but they could bring potentially no real value if they do not enable an actual outcome. It doesn't really matter how many candies you give to your customer. In the end, if the customer is not able to reach their destination, they will not be happy about it. So that's the idea of an outcome. The problem is each customer is different and has different outcomes compared to other customers. That's the thing that we need to understand, that you need to get inside your customer's mind in order to understand the actual need using that service. Because by doing that you can understand the actual outcome that they intend to achieve, and you can provide them with a better service. The more we understand about our customers, the better service we can provide to them. And also the customers may have different outcomes in different moments of time. Today I am in the hurry, I need to get in time. But tomorrow, I may not be in the hurry, so the outcome may be different. That means we need to have a very close relationship with our customers, with our consumers, in order to understand what they need and try to provide them with the best possible service. This is actually a very nice quote, which will help you understand better the difference between the output and the outcomes. People don't want to buy a quarter-inch drill, they want a quarter-inch hole. Customers don't care about the way you are doing things. What's important for them is to help them achieve a particular outcome. So in itself, the service has no value. The real value, and the only value, that the service can provide, is when it actually helps the customer to achieve their intended outcome. That's the source of value for services. In this video, I will give you some concepts regarding risk management. First of all, let's start with the definition of risk. What exactly is a risk? As you can see, risk is considered to be an uncertainty of outcome. So, it is something that might happen, and it could prove to be damaging to the organization. It can cause harm or loss for the organization. Or it could compromise your ability to achieve your objectives. So it's something negative. It's something bad. However, that is not entirely true. There is also a positive side to risk. And you should know that for every risk there is also an associated opportunity. It's like having two different sides of the same coin. One is the negative side and one is the positive side. So, whenever you are dealing with a decision, whenever you have to decide something, you have to consider both sides of the coin. For example, if things go bad if you flip the coin, you may get lucky, and the coin may flip on the right side. And you may achieve an opportunity. But at the same time, you may be unlucky and flip the coin the wrong way, and you get the negative effect. That's the difference between risk and opportunity. Completely avoiding risk is not an option. Because you can understand what it means. It means, basically, you never flip the coin again. That doesn't make sense, because from an organizational perspective it means you choose to do nothing. That means you stop evolving. You stop making any decisions, but are not going to be competitive anymore. So we need to flip the coin on a daily basis. Every time when we decide something, every time when we face different options, we need to consider both risk and opportunity. And then make sure we do the proper things, and we make the right decisions. What about risk management? Risk management is the practice of actually flipping the coin, and also being aware of the consequences. Whenever you are faced with decisions, you have to think about the risks and the opportunity associated with every option that you have. Make sure you understand properly the risk, and you handle them correctly. We have a methodology for doing that. You will see a very simple methodology in 3 steps. Identification, assessment, and treatment. A method that can be used to manage the risks. Identification basically means you have a list of scenarios. You need to think about the list of things that may go wrong. Try to identify as many risk scenarios as possible. Assessment, it's about trying to prioritize them. Understand which is a low risk. Which one is the medium risk? Which are the high risk? You can use a formula, like impact and probability. In that way, you can classify the risks, and you can have prioritization. Once you have done that, you can go to the 3rd step. About treatment. Depending on how high the risk is, you may either decide to kick it and go for the opportunity, assume the risk. Or you can decide that it's unacceptable to the organization. It has to be treated. For example, by implementing some measures to reduce the risk. These some key concepts that you need to remember for the exam. Regarding risk management. First of all, it must be an integral part of an organization. What does that mean? It's something that can do from time to time. When you remember that there may be some risk involved. It's something that we need to do on a daily basis. Whenever you do something, you basically flip the coin. And you need to be aware of that. There needs to be a so-called risk culture in the organization. That means people need to be aware of the concept of risk. They need to understand risk management. Whenever they are faced with the decision, they need to understand that there are 2 possible sides to the coin. They need to be able to evaluate both the opportunity and the risk before going any further. That could be difficult to build such a risk culture, but it is vital for creating value for the customers. If you do not take sufficient risks, you will also not be able to achieve sufficient opportunities. So, your customers will not be satisfied with what you are offering to them, and they will probably go to a different provider who is willing to take more risk. Implement changes faster, because they will consider the organization to be too slow. On the other hand, if you are taking too much risk, you may end up having problems, not being able to deliver what you have promised to your customers. Again, they might not be happy. So risk management is about keeping the right balance between risk and opportunity. It should be addressed at all levels, which means there are different types of risks. We call it risk management, but in reality, it happens at different levels. There are strategic risks, for example, which may concern top management. There are also tactical and operational risks, which may concern everybody else in the organization. Everybody has to deal with risk on a daily basis. That's a reality. In this video, we will discuss the different stakeholders in the organization. Some important roles such as the sponsors, customers, and users. We need to understand that, within an organization, if we are talking about the service consumer organizations, there could be different roles. Each one of these roles will have a different view regarding the way they are supposed to be using the service, regarding the services themselves. For example, the sponsor. The sponsor is mostly interested in the financial aspect because the sponsor is responsible for approving the budget. So they will be the ones approving the budgets for consuming the service. Another important role is the role of the customer. The customer is the one defining the requirement. The customer is also responsible for generating the outcomes or responsible for achieving the outcomes from using the service, from exploiting the service. So the customer will mostly be interested in outcomes, on the specification of the requirement for the service. But we should not forget also the user. The user is the one actually using the interface. Users are most interested in usability and the experience when interacting with the application with the service. From their point of view, users' view is most important. These are some of the important roles in I.T.I.L. These are some key points that you should remember. First of all, each one of them may have a different perspective on value. Sponsors are mostly interested in money. Customers are basically interested in the requirement, utility, and warranty provided by a particular service. Users will be interested in usability and the user experience. In some cases, these roles can be played by the same person. For example, if you are working with individual customers, then the same person may be the sponsor, customer, and the user at the same time. But usually, when we work with the later organizations, these roles are played by different individuals. All of them are important, and they have to be considered, especially when we prepare, design a new service, because all of them may have a different perspective, different expectation, and they may have a large influence on the success of the service. So we cannot ignore any of these three roles. Also, apart from the sponsor, the customer, and the users, there could be other stakeholders, which could be very important. For example, we might have external stakeholders like external regulators, providing rules and regulations, and laws that we need to obey, that we need to follow. Also, if we are an external IT provider, then our customer would be an external stakeholder. So customers can also be external stakeholders. Also, if we are a larger company, we might have shareholders. Most of the companies also have suppliers that they need to collaborate with. Also, the society and the community in which the organization is functioning should also be considered the stakeholder, because it has a set of expectations. And it has also a large amount of influence on the success of the services and the organization. So before we initiate something, before we start investing and building service, first of all, we should understand who are the stakeholders, and we should understand what exactly is the position. What is the point of view, the perspective of each one, in order to make sure our service is fit for purpose and fit for use from everybody's perspective. This was section number 2. In the next section, we will discuss about the I.T.I.L guiding principles.